room. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on our first panel of Building Publics, Humanities Speak of Race, a series where we will workshop the projects developed by the SOF Heyman and the Humanities and the New York Public Humanities New York Public Humanities Graduate Fellows. My name is Maria Gonzalez Pendas. I am the coordinator of the Humanities in Practice initiative at the SOF Heyman. This is the second installment of the Building Publics Spring Series. We started last summer, and this year we count with the generous co-sponsoring of the Office of the Vice Provost for Faculty Advancement, and part of their initiative that this office is funding with the Addressing Racism Call to Action initiative. The series draws from a long commitment from the SOF Heyman to promote civically engaged and public-facing humanistic work and teaching at Columbia. Its Humanities in Practice initiative, more particularly, offers resources and a space. So before I keep talking, I want to remind everyone that we're in a Zoom seminar, not a webinar. So please keep your microphones off. And we'll invite everybody to join in with their microphones and their camera at the end of the workshop to be part of the conversation. Thank you. So as I was saying, I was introducing the Humanities in Practice initiative from the SOF Heyman, which offers resources and a space for humanists to explore ways towards a more expansive public role. Part of these efforts include a series of fellowships for graduate students to help them explore the public dimensions of their scholarly work. I want to remind everyone here that the applications for next year fellowships are now open. The deadline is on May 10th, and we're going to put the link to these fellowships in the chat. If you're interested in looking into them and applying for one, please do so and contact me if you have any questions about it. Every year, we select an interdisciplinary group of emerging scholars, graduate students, to work both together and independently to devise and implement projects that bridge humanistic thinking with matters of social justice, scholarly research with community building and public communication. During the funding period, during the year, students work closely with at least one community organization and participate in methods workshops. In the next few weeks, and you see the program in your screens, we will hear about the fruits of these efforts. We will learn, for instance, about ways to facilitate intergenerational conversations on medical family history in communities of color, and about interfaith concerns that bring together non-hegemonic spiritual communities in New York City, just to give you a taste of the different conversations we will have. In the spirit of the collective nature of all public humanities work, and as a way to both rehearse and better understand the craft of this mode of knowledge production, every workshop includes a discussion with some of the community partners who have been part of the conception of the projects, and at times also a response with fellow scholars. As a year of lockdown, these were particularly challenging times to develop scholarly work through public ties. But it was also a year marked by pressing debates on and widespread promises to dismantle the whiteness that governed academia, an undoing that the public humanities has promoted for some time. Each workshop then will provide a window into the intellectual and logistical challenges implied in scholarly civic engagement, a practice that this year we want to frame specifically as critical to better speaking of, learning about, and thinking together about how race is indeed spoken of, construed, performed, and oftentimes silenced both outside and within the confines of academia. Through the year, I and the Humanities in Practice initiative have been merely a facilitator for these projects led by our students, which we have discussed also in the context of a seminar on public humanities methods offered in the Art History Department in the fall. Through these and other forums and conversations, the meaning of each of these projects is both the same and substantially different today than when our fellows proposed it a year ago. And I hope that in the course of the series, we will be able to also discuss how the empirical and collective mode of knowledge production in the public humanities has changed the way that you've conceived the projects and how they hit the ground. I want to begin then by thanking everyone involved in all of these very many and ongoing conversations. It was less of an ideal year to have any kind of conversation, and yet I think that we've had riveting and very engaging conversations. It has been an honor to work with all of you, and I've told you independently, but I wanted to say this publicly. I've learned a great deal from everyone and have been impressed by your dedication and openness to continually rethink the limits and assumptions of your work. Our conversation on your public humanities projects and on the relationships with your doctoral work were often full of doubts. And doubt, in my world, speaks of innovation. I really do believe that you are drawing the contours of the future of higher education with these public humanities projects. One of the most critical interventions of your work, as I see it, pertains the ways it pushes against traditions within the humanities and the boundaries that define it, including the class and racial boundaries that structure our syllabus, our footnotes, and the questions that we ask in the classroom, even when we do so in the name of diversity and inclusion. The methods that all of you fellows have developed to build community ties and produce reciprocal knowledge offer the humanities new strategies to interpret contemporary social concerns, and they unleash just radical forms of scholarly imagination. Our fellow today will make all of this both more specific and more evocative, I am sure. Margaret Banks, one of our grantees from Humanities New York and a PhD student in English and Comparative Literature, where she studies coming-of-age narratives of Black girls to explore their transgression and modes of being in an anti-Black world. She holds a BA in English from Amherst College and an MA in Education from Stanford Graduate School of Education. Prior to her doctoral studies, she taught middle school humanities and currently teaches high school humanities courses through Columbia's Double Discovery Center. As a teacher, she seeks to connect the world-making strategies encounters in her literary research to the strategies that Black girls already generate and use in their everyday lives. All of this comes beautifully together in her public humanities projects, Unbecoming Me Summer Camp. After she presents the project in conversation with some of her collaborators this year, we are thrilled to have Professor Ruth Nicole Brown as our special guest and respondent. Professor Brown is the inaugural chairperson of the Department of African American and African Studies at Michigan State University, and both a devoted scholar and a citizen of what she calls collective possibility. She's the author of books like Here Are Truths, The Creative Potential of Black Girlhood, and Black Girlhood Celebration Towards a Hip-Hop Feminist Pedagogy. And she has co-edited several anthologies, written numerous journals, written numerous articles, and produced artwork in various media. I'm not going to list all of her bio, but I will link her a bio page soon. I will also, for purposes of time, mention her collective Saving Our Lives Here in Our Truth, Sholhot, founded to meet Black girls face to face and heart to heart, and with the goal of activating home truths and bring others to futures of radical creative power and praxis. Thank you so much, Ruth Nicole, for agreeing to join us today. I could not imagine a better group of thinkers and doers to launch our series today. I'm certain that we're in for an illuminating and beautiful workshop ahead of us. I will now pass it on to Margaret, who will present the project, and then we'll have the response. I will then moderate a discussion. If you have questions that you want to advance, send them to me in the chat, and I'll bring them to you, but you can also digitally raise your hand at the time of the Q&A, and I will call on to all of you. We hope to be done a little bit before 6. And with that, on to you, Margaret. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. At this point, I want to first introduce Jydin Harwell, who's a sophomore at Frederick Douglass Academy, and she is also a student at Columbia's Double Discovery Center, where I met her. I'm so looking forward for y'all hearing from her today, later on with her response. So I'm just going to get my screen together. It takes me a bit because I only got to share a portion. Okay. All righty. Okay. So again, good afternoon, everyone. And I want to echo Maria's thanks to everyone who has helped organize this event today. I want to thank Ruth Nicole Brown for joining us. As I said earlier, your work has really been an inspiration to me since 2012. And it's really a true honor to have you here today to share your expertise on creative Black girlhood and nurturing spaces for Black girls to unbecome. And I also want to thank Jydin for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your experiences with us. We know that it's not easy being a teenager in a pandemic. So we're so grateful that you're here to share a piece of your story with us. So to begin, I'm going to share a small story. One many of you are probably familiar with. It's not one created, but it's one I've experienced, and I'm sure many of you have as well. It begins with two best girlfriends, Sula and Nel, the two protagonists in Toni Morrison's 1973 novel, Sula, as they walk towards the ice cream parlor. And on the way, a group of men look at the two 12-year-old girls as if they are pigs. And yet, Sula and Nel continue, best friends unconcerned with what their town deems Black girlhood should be. Morrison writes, because each had discovered years before that they were neither white nor male, and that all freedom and triumph was forbidden to them, that they had to set about creating something else to be. Throughout their childhood, Sula and Nel collaboratively create themselves, envisioning something new. Sula and Nel's discovery that the world was not built for their freedom is not unique. Across coming-of-age narratives of Black girls, from Harriet Jacobs' 1861 Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl to Akwaeke Emezi's 2018 Freshwater, Black girl characters strive for something else, to create an alternative life other than the precarious ones prescribed to them. Their alternative lives take different creative forms. We can think of Annie John, the titular character of Jamaica Kincaid's 1985 novel, as she climbs trees with friends and plays forbidden games in graveyards. Or we can think of Selena from Paul Marshall's Brown Girls, Brown Stones in 1959, who dances out of her mother's house and into a new life. We can also think of Xiomara from Elizabeth Acevedo's 2018 novel, The Poet X, who imagines a something else into being through her spoken word. All of these characters exist in the afterlife of slavery, what Saidiya Hartman defines as skewed life chances, limited access to health and education, premature death, incarceration, and impoverishment. The girl characters' lives are enveloped in slavery's lingering presence. There's little room for freedom and triumph beyond its enclosures. These enclosures impact real Black girls as well, particularly in the United States schooling system. As a teacher and a Black girl myself, I am deeply attuned to the erasure, push out, and piercing silence that underpin stories of many Black girls in classrooms. The African American Policy Forum found that Black girls are criminalized within schools, facing discipline up to 10 times more frequently than their white counterparts, often over minor or subjective issues like disobedience, disruptive behavior, or uniform violations. And Georgetown Center for Poverty and Inequality attributes these high discipline rates to educators' misperceptions that Black girls need less protection, support, and comfort because they are more independent and hypersexualized. As a former teacher, I watched my Black girl students face unfair punishment for minor infractions from administrators. I watched their confusion be mistaken for disrespect, their self-advocacy be mistaken for aggression, raised hands go unseen, and their questions go unheard. Frustrated, I left the classroom to explore the impossible futures of transgressive Black girls through doctoral study in English. My research and public humanities project seek to bridge the survival strategies I encounter Black girls utilizing in coming-of-age narratives to real Black girls navigating the afterlife of slavery. How might Black girls create a something else like Sula and Nel? My project, the Unbecoming Me Summer Camp, fosters a space for Black girls to convene and create their own something else through creative practice while unraveling traditional constructions of Black girlhood, a process that I term unbecoming. Rather than in Black girl coming of age narratives, Unbecoming is a series of creative and performative transgressions that unravel the maternal figure and community scripts of respectability. Rather than come of age into rigid prescriptions, the Black girl characters unbecome through creative performances in public space, expanding their ideas of what girlhood can be. Today, I will give a brief gloss into Unbecoming and modes of literary transgressive Black girlhood before moving into the details of the project, of which there are two main components, the internship and the actual camp. So, Unbecoming is rooted in the Black girl coming of age narrative, often referred to as the Black female Bildungsroman. And I would suggest, however, that categorization or genre is actually an inept description of the novel, as Black girl characters and their stories cannot fit into the Bildungsroman narrative structure, a narrative arc that typically ends in redemption and a formal assumption into society. For reference, the first widely recognized Bildungsroman was written in 19th century Germany and featured a white male protagonist grappling with his parents and community's desires for his life versus his own desires, before ultimately assuming his role into society at the novel's close. Black girl coming of age narratives tend to not wrap up so neatly. Instead, they feature Black girls grappling with the roles they've been handed, which are often subhuman, superhuman, Jezebel, Sapphire, Mule, right? We're very familiar with some of these terms. The novel's endings are typically quite fraught. Again, we can go back to Jamaica Kincaid's Annie John as the waves are lapping against the ship as she heads off to colonial England. We can also think of Selena and Paul Marshall's Brown Girls, Brownstones again, as she tosses her bangle into the Brooklyn brownstone debris. And the last line of that novel is a frail sound in that utter silence. And of course, we can turn towards Sula and hear Nel's circles and circles of sorrow as she begins to mourn her friend, her friendship, and the version of self they once created with each other. As the Bildungsroman structure cannot fully represent the lives of these Black girl characters, I choose not to categorize them as Bildungsroman, and for the purpose of this talk, we'll refer to them as narratives of unbecoming. One might ask, if many have adopted the Bildungsroman form or have accepted its categorization with noted revisions, why is there a need for a new language or a new categorization? And first, I think that genres are super important tools of interpretation, guidance, and accessibility. With distinct language, real Black girls and women navigating their own lives have a designated resource, their own chorus in the word. Secondly, and quite practically, if the characters and writers are creating something else, why continue to use ill-fitting language? As the name Unbecoming suggests, there is an undoing and subsequent remaking involved in these texts. The girl characters redefine their Black girlhood and womanhood for themselves. They go out of self, out of language, and into something else anew. As Hortense Spiller writes, to speak a truer word concerning myself, we must strip down through layers of attenuated meetings made in excess in time, over time, assigned by a particular historical order, and there await whatever marvels of my own inventiveness. And so to find those marvels of our own inventiveness, and to speak a truer word to these characters and ourselves, we must not only unbecome the language associated with Black girlhood and womanhood, but also the narrative structures meant to illustrate our subjectivity. Of note is that the term unbecoming purposefully leaves room for self and collective definition, similar to something else. Rather than follow a rigid arc or necessitate redemption, narratives of unbecoming lean into the ambiguity. Such openness allows us to be something somewhat like a nothing, which is maybe everything. There are glimpses of unbecoming throughout various coming-of-age narratives, but today I'll share a close reading of one of my favorite novels and a text that has generated Black feminist thought for decades, Sula. As I read the text, I'll share how we thought about these passages in the Unbecoming Me course and internship. So, one day after school, Sula and Nel approach a white boys notorious for harassing Black kids heading home. Tired of rerouting themselves to avoid trouble, Sula decides to take measures into her own hands. Nel watches with surprise and fear as Sula carefully sets down her lunchbox in front of the boys and draws a knife from her coat. She takes the knife and raises it in the air before quickly bringing it down and slashing the tip of her finger. Her gaze steady on the boys, she asks them a loud question in a quiet voice. If I can do that to myself, what you suppose I'll do to you? The boys run off, leaving Sula and Nel to contemplate their adventuresomeness, sparked between the intimacy of their friendship and creation of a something else. The above passage evidences how far Sula and Nel take their something else. It risks security and opens windows of possibility, whether new routes home or new ways of being in the world. At the root of this something else is a creative transgression, as Sula demonstrates above in her crafty demonstration to do away with the white boys' harassment. There's a certain deliberateness and drama associated with her act, the slow setting down of the lunchbox, the raised knife, the blood dripping to the ground. As she continues on in her life, she moves away from more like physical transgressions, and her transgression takes root in a disavowal of respectability politics that seek to constrain her performance of girlhood in the hopes of social mobility. Of course, when we read this text in class, we're not advocating for transgressions that result in sliced off fingers, but we do think about the craftiness of Sula's performance, the consequences we might face when opening up possibilities for ourselves, and the fierce determination and harbor that we feel within each other's presence. The second way we think about unbecoming in the course is through friendship, which is evidenced already by the passage that I just spoke about. Sula and Nel's friendship was an intense space of play and love, and I would even suggest a transgression of its own. The pair meet one night in their dreams. Nel, lying in a bed of poplars, anticipates the arrival of a prince, and Sula gallops through her own mind, smelling roses along the way. The comforting presence of another interrupts the girls' solitary lives, offering a sense that someone has interest in them in their world. When the two finally connect in person, they share an intimacy that encourages the unraveling of their Black girlhood into something new. How do Black girl friendships open space for unbecoming? What is unique about the intimacy shared between two young girls barred from freedom and triumph elsewhere? I suggest the female friendships provide a necessary space for Black girls to push at conventional prescriptions of Black girlhood to other modes of being, feeling, and knowing. My understanding of female friendship is framed by Kevin Quashie's understanding of the girlfriend figure in Black women's literature. For Quashie, the girlfriend is how the self comes into view for Black female literary figures. The distinction of a self versus other fades as the girlfriends become one and the same, exploring possibilities for life, even as consequences loom in the distance. Quashie's work primarily focuses on how Black women's relationality sparks a selfhood, and many have read Sula and Nel's relationship through a similar framework. Building on this work, I am interested in thinking how self-definition through friendship becomes a site of creative transgression. So with that understanding of unbecoming, and all that is informing the camp, I'm now going to move to discuss the actual project itself. So an important development that came out of my public humanities year is the Unbecoming Me Summer Camp internship hosted by the Double Discovery Center, which is a center on campus that empowers low-income first-generation students to achieve success to, through, and beyond college by providing them with a comprehensive network of support that includes academic enrichment, college and career success, and healthy minds and bodies. They hosted the first Unbecoming Me course in the fall of 2019 that has sparked all the rest of this work. And they have been a welcome home ever since, particularly Dr. Keisha Hayes and Dr. Aisha Haynes. They have carried me through this PhD program in many ways. And so I'm incredibly grateful for them in that space on Columbia's campus. But back to the internship, I thought it was really crucial that Black girls were a part of the planning process, as I fundamentally believe that Black girls are the experts on Black girlhood. And so the interns have greatly informed my thinking over different elements of the camp, especially on the rollout of activities and how to navigate the virtual space. Since February, we have met once a week on Thursdays to discuss the camp content, evaluate possible camp activities, including games, workshops, and projects. The interns participate in the activities, reflect on their experience, and then offer suggestions for the camp. This model has helped me to think about how to build community within the virtual space, which includes a leverage of games, music, modeling, vulnerability, and lots of workshops. As I move forward in the planning process, I will include the interns' recommendations for the camp, and if any of them are interested in actually continue the planning and the execution, they also have the space to do so. Because the interns completed activities that will happen in the camp, I'm going to share some of their work, and a few of them are here today. So you can get a glimpse of what unbecoming looks like in application and the possible activities that will occur during the camp. But before I do so, I want to provide some context for the camp so these activities make a bit more sense. So the project takes the camp format because there are a few summer enrichment programs dedicated for Black girls. Those that do exist have an academic focus seeking to combat the supposed summer slide, inundate students of coding, science, math, and literacy instruction. Other camps zero in on college prep and career readiness. And camps that hold space for play and exploration of being are a bit more difficult to find. And the Unbecoming Me camp settles within this opening. Due to coronavirus, the camp will take place over 2 weeks virtually in July, with hopes for an in-person outdoor celebration. Obviously, when I wrote my proposal, COVID-19 was not a thing and the camp was planned to be in person. So the virtual space was a big change in plans. While I initially thought it would be best to postpone the camp, I realized that students are still in need of summer programming and the camp can provide some structured fun for students. Additionally, the virtual camp can provide a bridge to a more robust in-person programming in the future. Because though structuring and engaging in meaningful virtual spaces can be difficult, it is in some ways more manageable, and especially financially, than launching an entire in-person camp that requires additional staff, food, insurance, and all of those things. So here's a sample schedule for the camp, which would typically begin around 10:30 with soft space for students to join if they would like, and then have a hard opening at 10:45. Originally, I had plans for journaling in that hard opening about 10:45, although we learned in one of our workshops during the internship that like journaling is not the most in vogue thing at the moment. So we're thinking about maybe changing that a bit. At 11 a.m., we will begin our creative sessions, which are the bulk of the camp day. Each day, students will participate in a workshop to try out a different creative practice. And during the internship, we did photography, drawing, journaling, and writing. But I'm hoping to extend one workshop to dance, to think about questions like how, if at all, is the body related to Black girlhood? How are Black girls taught to treat their body, feel about their body? How might dance help us to reconnect, love, or heal our racialized and gendered body? Afterwards, we would move into the lunchtime where students can step away from their computer and then come back at 1:15 for the afternoon creative session, which is either going to be a continuation of the morning one or a new session. And finally, we have a brief 15-minute cool down to close out the day at around 3:15 p.m. with more soft space until about 3:30. There's still some wiggle room with the schedule, as I don't want students to get Zoom fatigue, but I have found that 1 hour and 15-minute class to be great timing, and that's the format that DDC has used since they went virtual in spring 2020. And now we get to look at some student sample work, which is always the most fun part of these types of talks. And so I'm going to begin with one of my favorite short stories to teach, which is Girl by Jamaica Kincaid. And it's such a rich text for only a page and a half, but it does such a wonderful job of letting students kind of step out of themselves to think about how their girlhood has been placed onto them. This is mainly because it's literally a page and a half of all these verbs and actions that the speaker is telling this young girl to do. As you can maybe see in this here, wash the clothes on Monday, don't walk barefoot in the hot sun, and so on and so forth. And so usually I have students imitate the short story for their own lives to think about how their girlhood has been constructed for them. And here are some examples from past students. I just took lines from their different scripts. And we can see, you know, why your hair not straight, take some food off your plate, eating like you never ate. You must cross your legs. You never invited someone over. Is it because you're gay? Change your shirt and wear a sweater to cover your fatness. And I think students sometimes find this process to be very cathartic because it really allows them to think about their gender experience as something that doesn't actually have to be innate to them, but something that they have learned over time coming from different places. We also did a photography workshop with a photographer who took students through her own ideas of unbecoming and thinking about how photography can both capture unbecoming in practice, and you can also use it as a tool to unbecome. And so after the workshop was complete, I gave students 25 minutes to take photos, which in the virtual space was a little nerve-wracking because, you know, who knows what's actually going on. But they came back after the 25 minutes, and these are two examples of the photos that they took. And so this is Khalid, who I'm not sure if Khalid is here today, but she's using the mirror to frame herself, and she's using the rule of grid to make sure she's in this line. And then we have Aisha, who I did see here today, and this is her picture. She's using lines, and she's also using the rule of 3. So that's example of one work. And then the final project for the camp, as well as what I had the interns test it out, was to create their own scripted being using a creative practice of their choice. And so throughout the semester, we discussed varied ones, including hair, nails, quilting, food, and as the more traditional ones that we actually had workshops for, like the photography and the writing and the drawing. And then students then got to choose which medium and their topic of choice. And for some, this means they expanded on the miniature project they began in one of the workshops, like Khalid, she chose to continue using photography. And for others, they began something totally new. One example of this is from Serenity, who's also here today. Shout out to Serenity. And after we spoke about the hypersexualization of Black girls one class, Serenity decided she wanted to write a poem about the harassment that she has faced. And she texted her friends and collected stories and turned them into a poem. And with her poem, Serenity wanted to speak back to those who adultify her and steal her girlhood, which Jydin is going to speak about in a few. And by bringing in her friends' experiences, she was able to first create a space of friendship modeled in that vulnerability and shared experience. And we can also see that here in this poem and her choice to use the word we. And Serenity's poem proclaims that Black girls are not okay with the adultification and hypersexualization. They are not okay with the enclosures placed on them by slavery's lingering presence. They're not okay with the verbal harassment or the petty excuses. They're not okay, and whether through poetry, conversation, or artistic practice, Black girls are on their way, just like Sula and Nel, to creating something else to be. Thank you. We now are going to have a response by Jydin Harwell from Frederick Academy and the Double Discovery Center.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jydin Harwell. I'm a sophomore at Frederick Douglass Academy in Harlem, and I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me this evening. What does it mean to be a Black girl? What does Black girlhood mean to you? These were the questions that I came into upon participating in the Unbecoming Me course at Columbia University's Double Discovery Center. These questions opened my eyes to new possibilities and allowed me to reevaluate myself and how I showed up in this world. It helped me to rethink the purpose of claiming and re-identifying myself as a Black girl. Like Sula and Nel in Toni Morrison's well-revealed novel, Sula, who had discovered years before that they were neither white or male and all triumphs and freedoms were forbidden to them, we have to set about creating something else to be. Because we are not accurately represented as a people, and we don't have a true place in our society. I'm defined by stereotypes that are structured by white supremacy, and that is a problem because it constrains my possibilities for life. Even growing up, I used to shy away from my Blackness because I didn't want to be characterized by negative stereotypes. But the Unbecoming Me course helped me realize that these stereotypes aren't a period to who I am, but a comma, semicolon, or maybe a typo to who I am and who my people are. We as Black girls are complex, and we cannot just be boxed into terms of ghetto and aggressive. We have beautiful layers. And it is not that these traits of being ghetto and aggressive are bad. It is the negative connotation and the treatment that comes with having these traits placed on you. We as Black girls start at -10 and spend our lives trying to reach level 10 in our society. And no one should have to start their lives being below the standard and facing consequences for that. But with creativity, we as Black girls, we can create our own standards. In history, we've done it before. Look at soul food, once slave rations, that is now a desired cuisine that is better than what gourmet can offer. So why not do the same for our identity? As a Black girl, I can create my own thing to be, and that is freeing. And this is what unbecoming is about. We have to unbecome what society wants us to become our true selves. It's like having to lose your mind to find your peace of mind. And we do this as Black girls, not for the approval or for the mere transgression of the white supremacist lens, but because it is the truth that needs to be represented about our people. There are many ways to unbecome. Toni Morrison highlights the complexity and the abstraction of unbecoming through Sula and Nel's life experiences. Since they were neither white or male and the triumphs were forbidden to them, they made their own triumphs in which their lives could be anything imagined. Nel used these factors of inferiority to constrict and to conform her in society. Nel became what was supposed to come of her into neatest of ways. She was the pillar of her community. She married young, had 2 children, and played a significant part in church. As for Sula, she liberated herself of societal expectations by transgressing and creating a path which suited her best. I'm inspired by Sula's model of living, even though her life wasn't easy, and in Unbecoming, she faced consequences. The art of transgression can be as simple as wearing an afro to school, or as extreme as what Sula did in slicing her finger to get the outcome you desire in the world. Sula died free, and as she would say, in the love of her own dirt, because she created that freedom for herself, despite society's opinion. And like Sula, I and many Black girls can liberate ourselves by ignoring the limiting structures that are set for us and to take the road of unbecoming. Though it is hard, we will have our freedoms and triumphs because we will create our own. Now I'm going to return to the question of, what does Black girlhood mean to me? And honestly, I don't have a solid answer right now, but I'm steadily learning what that means to me. I'm learning that in being a Black girl, there is strength and resilience that we carry. We bounce back like the curls in our hair. We are full of potential, and unlike the marigolds in the bluest eye, we will bloom. In that novel, the characters believe that the soil didn't allow the marigolds to grow. This infertile soil is symbolic to what society expects or gives Black girls from day one. Like I mentioned before about -10, we are planted into a structure that doesn't want us to grow or even have the chance to be a marigold or not. It takes having fertilizer or changing the soil, such as spaces for Black girls like Miss Margaret is providing, and being surrounded by strong Black women, which I'm proud to say I have in my family, for us to grow. I'm grateful for Miss Margaret for creating a space for Black girls to be girls, because so much of our girlhood is preparing to be a woman. We out the room are at first cute and then taught to uphold the utmost propriety, even as early as 5, told to sit right and cross your legs. But the whole world is a place for boys to be boys. And I do not mean this phrase to talk about male accountability, but rather the innocence that they're allowed to have. When do Black girls get to be girls? When do we get to be curious about the world and ourselves, to let loose and not worry about a man's perception of us? It seems that in our society, there is no transition, just girl to woman. Think of that famous scene from Zora Neale Hurston's novel, Their Eyes Are Watching God, when Janie was sitting under the pear tree, being curious about her beads or her blossom. She was curious about love, but on another level, she was trying to discover herself outside of the world that her shelter living didn't provide. As we know in the novel, out of protection, her grandmother forced her to settle down into an unhappy marriage at the age of 16. Similarly, in Sula, Nell's mother stripped away her imagination to make her better fit into society by using respectability politics. It seems like a motif in the story of Black girlhood, and going back to the metaphor of the bluest eye, that our caregivers have to protect and mold us in a way that we don't get the pesticides of society stunting our growth. Pop culture even forces us to make that transition to womanhood with hypersexualization at a young age and dolls that look of grown women. They have the saying, don't grow up too fast. And yet the world forces Black girls to grow up too fast. But I believe it is important for us to have this time to be girls and having the space to actually grow up makes way for beautiful life lessons and friendships to build so pure maturity can happen. Not something forced in the plea of survival, but actual growth in all of its entirety. The Unbecoming Me course and internship has allowed me to grow pleasantly within myself, and my peers would agree within their experiences. So to the roses, the marigolds, the hydrangeas, sunflowers, calla lilies, and even the weeds of the world, we will grow, we will blossom. Thank you so much, Ms. Margaret, for allowing me to share my experience of Unbecoming. And thank you guys for having me this evening.
Jydin, you make me so proud. You have me tearing up. I'm so proud of you. Dr. Ruth Nicole Brown, would you like to give a response or any feedback that you have or questions about the project.
Here, it is an honor to be in this conversation, Jydin. That was amazing. Remember to grab your receipt. You are in full bloom. I am eager to follow your curiosity. I appreciate your readings, and I see you as you are now, and so excited for all the ways you will continue to share your knowledge about Black girlhood with all of us. What does it mean? The meanings will change, but your brilliance endures. Thank you for that. Thank you. And please feel free to join in this conversation as I talk with Margaret and you more about what's going on with Unbecoming and the summer camp. Margaret, that was phenomenal. I'm excited. I have so many questions, thoughts, and ideas, but I've organized it, my response in 3 parts. I'm just gonna start. So Margaret has invited me into this conversation, but I should introduce myself to everyone. My name is Ruth Nicole Brown. And as the introduction said, I am the inaugural chairperson of African American and African Studies at Michigan State University and have dedicated my career to creating knowledge and making art about Black girlhood with Black girls. So for well over a decade now, I've also taken to the page with courage and data, participation, questions, observations, Mapa Ryan's Womanist What Ifs, and I argued for Black girls and named Black girlhood as the whole of everything. In each assemblage, story, performance, publication, poem, and public event, I hold some space for those I don't know, but who I believe are also wanting to write to the depth and expanse of Black girlhoods. I am so happy to now know you, Margaret. I was anticipating you in the work. I also want to shout out Aria Holliday's collection, the Black Girlhood Studies collection. That's right here. And in the foreword that I wrote, I had a chance to think with Toni Morrison. And so I'm really grateful for that opportunity. And given your read of Sula, I think it's important to recall Morrison read. Morrison read, what does it mean? Jydin might ask me. I think it means the seriousness of Black girls' ideas and critiques of dress code policies. I believe your ideas, Jydin, and critiques can hold their own. Black girls' theories, descriptions, representations, critical literacies, charting numbers, and new planets is a whole conversation. Morrison read, promised us, Margaret. Who and how that Black girls remember ain't even been asked till now, and we already over it. Unbecoming something else. Step out, go back. Take Black girls serious enough to bring water to the summer camp. Laughter, a plan that might have to be discarded. Some room to rest, maybe instead of journal. Banana pudding cupcakes, paper full of energy, a candle to light, maybe even some incense. Black girls be serious about being alive. Take direction from Black girls and reorganize these Black girlhoods. Work hard to show her the pleasures and the words that mean something worthwhile and fun. And we extend again, and we extend again. And in Unbecoming Summer Camp, always remember, Margaret, to keep extending. Morrison read means that. Second part 2. This is me and you in conversation, Margaret, about what it means to create this knowledge. To reframe and reorient the entire theoretical project of Black girl-centered research. Because the questions, assumptions, frameworks typically disappear Jydin's brilliance or erase Black and brown girls together. Our response to the larger force can be singing to unsound the conditions that break hearts. Our response to the larger force of those stereotypes that Jydin mentioned can be talking to unbecome the conditions that break hearts. Theorizing heartbreak, like push out, as you mentioned and know well from your experiences of being a teacher, still, I believe in my Black girl imagination, evidence some exchange of beauty. What do I mean by that? Because I think that when we focus on push out, we do the work of Black girlhood studies to remember that it is likely for many of us, it was certainly true for me, that before we were pushed out, it was a Black woman who so often first pulled us in. I see that's what you're doing now, Margaret, in the Unbecoming Summer Camp. And I believe that's probably what you did where you were in the classroom teaching, pulling Black girls in with your intellect because you were able to recognize theirs, pulling us in through your example, pulling them in through love. That's beauty. Both the beauty and the conditions of exchange are as much friendship as they are political, as they are personal memories of ephemera, most of which goes unsaid. It's like my Aunt Pat's rolls and how she just brings them to you on a Thursday morning in November with so much resolve. That is another way. I think that's what you might call a something else. Processes of levitation, processes of unbecoming are incredibly useful for poem, literature, analysis, politic theory, praxis, because when Black girls are together, you have to suspend belief and disbelief as we keep believing in what Jydin said. You must feel power, as you wrote, Margaret, in vulnerability. You must really know presence. Virtually, I'm gonna ask you about that to make it for everybody. And I believe that the audience for me looks very much like the same people who made me possible to be here now. And at first glance, maybe the Zoom screen doesn't seem big enough. Maybe the leap to the virtual isn't how you imagined. And I think that it's important as you do the work to keep track of these anxieties and what will also happen if we made that shadow work part of our public humanities as well. I mean, we didn't know if we were ready to do Soul Hots, but the lesson is always creative transgression and friendship. When you heart to heart, it don't feel like work or organizing or programming or education even. When your homegirl not only has your back, but won't let you speak an unkind word against yourself. When one can hold space while the other makes it, being worth the attention that Black girls gives is fundamentally soul high. In the camp, find out what holds their attention and know that that's worth a contribution to Black girlhood studies. The etymology of internship and course and the room that Margaret makes is heavenly and miracle in Jydin and others. Each small moment, and I do believe in the small moments, are invitations to release some pain for more breathing room. You can breathe together, perhaps, and then journal. After she gives you something of significance, traces of gratitude become a map for the next time. A password may be needed to log in, to zoom in. So remember, the password is always this: Margaret, feeling like a sure thing in Jydin's presence. The password is Jydin, feeling like a sure thing in Margaret's presence. The password is this: Sula, feeling like a sure thing in Nel's presence. Part 3. I have some comment questions that we can use to open up discussion or continue our chatting about in conversation with others on the call. So to you, Margaret, one thing that I learned early on in doing my work of Saving Our Lives, Here I Choose, which is the collective celebration of Black girlhood. When I started that, I had already been in community with Black girls through a volunteer situation. I organized some of the dopest Black women that I knew who were living in the same town. And I told them the revolution was going down on a Friday at 3:00. Come be a part of it. We was gonna make Black girlhood with Black girls, and that was the revolution. That was what I pitched to them. And that's surely what happened from that very first time we were together. We had the goal, and the goal was to celebrate Black girlhood in all of its complexity. And I am here 16 years later, still following the organic knowledge of our collective celebration. So I just want to leave that with you to encourage you to follow the organic knowledge of Unbecoming in summer camp. And what does that mean? Well, it raises a few questions. So what does the discourse of public humanities afford you in terms of making Unbecoming summer camp? What does the discourse of public engagement afford you in order to create space to be with Black girls? Following the organic knowledge means there will automatically be some necessary and important petty true turn up, as we call it in Soul Hot, against the very same language used to make your work legible in the academy. In other words, what do Black girls say about unbecoming public humanities? What do they say about unbecoming public engagement? They will expand those institutional discourses that make sense of our work. And I hope you keep track and write that down. 2, I invite you and encourage you to tend to the tenderness. I appreciated Jydin's response about the interior. And I encourage you to tend to the tenderness of your own interior, even as you promise me you will apply for all the public engagement grants and all the public engagement awards. That's another way of asking, how are you taking yourself as you make yourself available for so many others? 3rd and lastly, there is so much more unknown than known about Black girls and Black girlhood. Keep asking what it means. Trust your ideas, your study, your praxis, and believe me, we did not tell it all. Know what is the girls to keep, and they trust you to hold it, and I'm certain you will. Thank you. I look forward to being in conversation.
Thank you so much. Maria, are you gonna?
I think that I would love if we had now, 5 minutes just to have all of the we just witnessed sink in. No, I think this was such a wonderful rehearsal and peek into the work that you've been doing, Margaret. I really cannot emphasize enough you know, the beauty that you've all seen in some of the statements and how the ideas have layer really speak of the way that Margaret thinks and that Margaret works. And it just came together so beautifully. And at the same time, I think we all want more. You know, this is the tip of the iceberg of so much more. Jydin, your response was beautifully put together. It was rich. I have so many ideas. And Ruth Nicole, you know, you've challenged Margaret's work, Jydin, but also our work as public humanist facilitators. So thank you all for all of this. I want to give you a chance, Margaret, to respond to Ruth Nicole's suggestions. And I know these are things that you will be thinking about for years to come, because there's so much there. And I'm sure that this is the beginning of a long conversation. I have a few questions. I'm going to let you respond first, Margaret, and Jydin, perhaps you as well, to some of the things you just heard, provocations, suggestions. Everyone, please type your questions, raise your hand, and I will call on to you with questions, but also maybe just ideas and suggestions, thoughts in the making. This is what it is all about. So Margaret, is that okay? Do you want to respond now? Yeah.
I only have so much to say.
Hold on one question. I'm going to invite everyone, sorry, to turn on your cameras in the spirit of, if you can, in the spirit of, you know, workshop and collectivity. Thank you.
Yeah, I only have so much of a response. I feel like I'm going to be meditating on that for a very long time. So thank you so much for that. I think one thing I really enjoy thinking about that room to rest. Jydin and I were talking the other day about, you know, when do Black girls get to be soft, and when do we get to, with that space of play, when do we also have that time for softness and vulnerability and rest? And so I really appreciate that, you know, that challenge in there. Ooh, I'm also like very emotional.
Good to see the people. Yeah, it's good to see you.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna. Ooh.
But it's so, you know, I love.
It's okay.
To hear you, like going back to your provocation before, Ruth Nicole, or sort of showing the shadow work that happens in the work. I mean, we could spend a whole hour talking about the emotional labor that is implied in public humanities work, and it's very real, and it seems to be not a craft, but it is also a craft, like any form of caring work. So I think that this is something also to be addressed, and for us collectively to think about how do we talk about it, how do we share it, how do we make it, how do we give emotional labor both its value, due value as labor, but also as a scholarly labor and work. It produces knowledge. So it is beautiful to see all of these different generations of thinkers coming together. So please ask your questions if you may. I do have a couple of questions to the three of you as we have those hands being raised, please. And I would love to hear from Sophie and Serenity also if you wanna, you know, pitch in your experience. It was very interesting for me to hear the three of you talk, not explicitly, but very potently in terms of the now. No presence, no, you said, Ruth Nicole. Jydin, you talk about the complexity of the day and about learning identity. I think that it's so important, or it was so powerful for me to hear you talk about the now, the present, in ways that perhaps go against this constant promise of the future, you know, how the future is going to change, how you're, you know, the new generation and the promises that need to be fulfilled in the future for Black girls, for Black in general. But it is about the now. You know, it is about fulfilling promises and identities now. Whoever you become, you will become. But this emphasis on the now as opposed on the future, I find it very powerful. And I don't know, I think it goes against perhaps some of these, you know, rhetorics of expectations also, no, that we have both in academia, but also as teenagers. So I would love to hear you reflect on this condition of time or even of history, no? As you talk about this, and also complexity, you know, this is the word that came through so beautifully, the complexity of the identity, but also of the work. It's not just a scholarly work, it's not artwork. It's a complexity of all of this. And I want to commend Margaret for bringing in photography, art, and art practices. I know this is something that you've thought through the year. You're like, I'm a literary person, I'm a word person, and you brought it in so beautifully. So I would love to hear Jydin, Sophie, Serenity, talk about your experiences across media, word, image, art, and Ruth Nicole, also some of your experiences with that. And again, these are just a bunch of questions for you to answer or not answer. And I'd love to hear from others as well.
I think in talking about time, I think it's important for us to focus on the present and tie in history in our present, because yes, we can look at the future, but we need to fix what's going on now so then the future can be better. For the question of the creativity, I think that by including different medias, it allows us to see different perspectives of how, like, in speaking to the complexity of unbecoming, like, of how you can unbecome, how it doesn't have to be one thing, that you can be many.
One thing I'm thinking about, Maria, in your question of time and reflecting on my own emotionalness, like I'm always ready to cry if you know me. I'm thinking about how so often that, you know, there's not space for that in our academic labor, right? And especially when I'm thinking about Black girlhood studies, like that work is so emotional. You know, when I first read Serenity's poem, I was like, oh my God, like some of that language, you know, that is coming to her at all times, like it's heartbreaking. And thinking about sometimes within the academy, there's not enough time to really meditate and think through these things. It's like, go, 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 go. Or it's not time for crying or resting, as Dr. Brown said earlier. So.
Yeah, agreed with everything you both said. And I think that's the brilliance of Unbecoming and your approach to it through literature. And I forget, I believe it was a poet, and I don't know, somebody will Google it. But they said, you know, becoming is so violent. It can be so violent. And so to think about the unbecoming, there is that creative space there to be more than one thing, to mighty morph, to look underneath, to listen more deeply. I also think the attention given to unbecoming is so important because it does disrupt this idea that we hold in our collective imagination that young people are only important for who they will become. What do you want to be when you grow up? You know, that cliche thing. And I love the history is in the present as is the future in the now. And I know that when we are really together, heart to heart and soul hot, we started to say to each other, and I love you in the present moment, because nothing was more realer than that. And then that exponentially goes backward and forward in ways that, you know, time will show.
Yeah, and it's one of the lines in Jydin's talk where she's like, you know, so much of a girl is spent preparing to become a woman, right? It's stolen from me so quickly. And I was like, yes, Jydin, yes. And I think she's spot on about that. And, you know, not getting that present moment to just play and be curious or, you know, explore who you want to be in that time.
I'm leaving the time open a little bit again to ask that you know, jump in on the conversation or raise your digital hand. The way that you raise your digital hand is, is it in reactions? No. Yes, you go to reactions and then you raise your digital hand. But I mean, speaking of this complexity and the multimedia and the being on the now, again, I think that this working across media, like Jydin said, for the exercises, I find it so interesting to hear you talk about perhaps how some of the exercises that you thought were going to go one way, changed as you put them in practice and the students approached the different media, and whether there's any distinction that you could draw working with the literary genre versus working with more hands-on visual media. And I'm particularly interested in hearing you talk about friendship and whether these exercises and jumping into these exercises together, how do they work within that construction of friendship, but also of loving in the moment, making things together. I see making things together, and maybe it is writing things together as well. I'm less familiar with that medium, but making things together is a mode of love. Yeah. So I wonder if perhaps the student Jydin, you can talk about what happens when you do things and they break, they don't work out. You get I don't know, because it's virtual, so you probably didn't have the chance to do them really collectively. But I would love to hear you talk about the relationship between friendship and making things or writing things.
I think that friendship is a crucial part to making something else to be, because it's like having your support system, and that in making mistakes, though it may seem like funny, like making those mistakes together, it allows you to learn more, because you can even see the different possibilities of your mistakes. So I think friendship is definitely crucial, and even in talking about issues too, it's crucial to unbecoming. Mm-hmm. Like everybody has to have a Sula or a Nel to their life. So
one thing I'll add on to what Jydin said is being virtual was really difficult, and students would keep their cameras off, and sometimes it's like, who am I talking to? Like, what's happening? And you could play music, sometimes there's a lag in conversation because some people want to chat instead of unmute yourself. And you want to make the space as welcoming, and nurturing as possible. So you really try to accommodate all those different needs. But one thing I really loved to see throughout the semester, Maria, was when, I didn't have to talk. And it was often after students were sharing their work with each other. I was worried about this, like I couldn't figure this out. What did y'all think? And then somebody would jump in. Jydin might say to Miriam, I do think, you're creative, or I do think like you did that. I think that is cool. And then you would have that conversation, and I didn't have to, speak. And so I think working on the project, I never had them actually work on a project together, but that's something to, put in the head for the camp. But through those art projects, I think that's when they really were able to do, in the games, I think, where they were able to come together and really try to form some type of friendship through the interwebs. And then I, thought Jydin actually the other weeks came to me and she's like, do you think it'd be possible to have some in-person something to kind of solidify, what she felt was like a friendship? And she said, Jydin, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, girl. She said, she felt like that would have been so much more real in a way. And I was like, yeah, I agree with you. And that's something that I'm thinking about as we move to the camp, and wanting to have that in-person celebration at the end where we share our projects together, and hoping that maybe that is some way to kind of, tether that experience together. Because you can make it work on the virtual space, but I do agree there's something about being together in outdoor space that I think really makes Unbecoming special.
Did everybody know each other before or not? No, nobody knew each other.
A few went to school with each other, but they were in separate grades. And, maybe passing through DDC, but because DDC has been virtual since March of last year, a lot of these students hadn't actually met each other beforehand.
Yeah, which speaks, to the additional labor in times of virtual collectivity, which is, of course, not a thing, quite the opposite, no? The additional, what do you think, Ruth Nicole? You think, I'd love to hear you think, and you mentioned it, no, in your presentation, no? the difficulties, but also the possibilities that the virtual grid is allowing us to construct collectivities differently.
Yeah, that is the question. How did it work virtually? I mean, you just mentioned a couple of things already with, communication through the chat, visual communication. I'm wondering, because I also know that when we get together, we tend to like unbecome the Zoom. We can unzoom a Zoom, I'm interested in those transgressive and disruptive moments. If there were any more you can share with us.
I think that during the internship, we definitely started to get a connection with each other, though it was hard because it's virtual and it's like we don't get to really see each other. It's like steadily with like workshops that we did and like doing the activities and like rating them with each other, we started to get to know each other more. And like, I feel like a connection was still like made.
I mean, I think in thinking of putting my teacher hat on of like the virtual classroom space, one thing I always try to make known whenever I go into like any type of learning space is like, here are my assumptions about, what this space, like, what are yours? What can we make those known? That way, none of us are confused about what we're trying to get out of the space or what we're bringing here. And I think that helps us to, transgress some of the norms, one of just being at like Columbia University on their Zoom and what it means to be like doing public humanities, kind of like what you were saying before, Dr. Brown. And then I think the one positive thing about, starting on Zoom together and not having that much of a precedent is that, you really get to try things out. So when we do the workshop and, the photographer comes for the first 30 minutes, and then I'm like, okay, goodbye, leave your apartment, go outside, take photos wherever you would like, and then we'll come back and we'll share and we'll see what happens. Instead of expecting that we all have to be in the same little virtual space or little things. Often when we do work, we break out into several different breakout rooms. So, there's a collaborative one, there's a quiet one, there's a conference room, and people are working on different projects, and people are, if you're doing photography, maybe you're talking to a person who's also doing photography. If you're also doing things about hair, maybe you're talking to that other person doing it about hair, and really trying to like expand Zoom into, a much larger space so we can have space for like all the conversations and skills that need to be trained or had or talked about.
I want to, Margaret, I think it is important just to complete, and Ruth Nicole just mentioned, is that you really keep track of these things that are happening in the ground and you're adjusting, because this is so much part of the value of your project, no? In addition to the, the beautiful way that you put it together, the exercises, Jydin's presentation, but these sort of production transgressions and discoveries that you make are so valuable, I think, to the project of Unbecoming in particular, and to this kind of explorative, expanded humanities work in general. I do want to bring two questions from the audience. I'm going to read them out. But May Williams and Serena Williams, if you can turn on your cameras, if you can, that would be great. If you can't, it's fine. May Williams asks, Margaret, how do we move the larger culture to embrace Black girls unbecoming? And Serena Williams asks, and what is the value in cross-generational spaces for such transgressions? Beautiful questions.
First of all, these are my aunties, so hey, y'all. We love them. First, to Aunt Mamie, I would say that I think like Black girls, there already is a larger culture of Black girls unbecoming. They just might not be using the unbecoming language, but I think this is not a new idea. I think it's something that, Toni, I saw in Sula and, across different coming of age of narratives. And one thing I also think about, especially as I was doing this internship, is, I had this idea of unbecoming is just like, we're really gonna think about how we've been placed into this genre of human. You can get really like academic and theoretical with it, and we're going to create something else to be. And in the way that sometimes for, my students, that means like, I'm just going to wear my hair in an afro today, or, I'm not going to worry about what so-and-so told me, or I am going to, clap back to this person. And I think that's what I really enjoy about Unbecoming, and something that I've been thinking about as I've been teaching this course for the past 2 years, is letting Black girls take that up for themselves in the way in which it feels meaningful for them in that presence, as we were talking about earlier. So that's what I'll say to that one question. And then two, that's my Aunt Bebe. And there's this quote from Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon where she talks about Hagar, and she says, like, you know, she needed what most colored girls needed, a chorus of grandmamas, mamas, sisters, aunties, church, like any person you could imagine, to give her the strength and the humor of for life, like to live life, basically. And I think that's what comes through cross-generational spaces, is where you have that chorus to really come in and think about, you know, the different survival strategies that have existed throughout time. I think we can look at respectability politics, which obviously gets a lot of flack these days, right? For being like this antiquated idea of, you know, like it's terrible, it's people distance themselves from Blackness, yada, yada, yada. But when, you know, thinking about Evelyn Higginbotham, when she wrote that book about those Baptist Black churchmen, like they were, you know, they were creating life for themselves as well. Like they were trying to make room for themselves in some way. And, you know, now we're like, you know, that's not what we want to do. But they were also, you know, I think making room for themselves. And I can see the glimpses of Unbecoming and things that they were doing in the way that we might think of it now. And obviously the political theory is a bit different there, but I think the strategy of trying to make some space in this world for you when you've been barred from freedom and triumph is similar. And I think it's important for us to learn those and know about those genealogies as we, you know, come together across generationally.
If I could just say, Margaret, when I was growing up in Georgia in the 60s, Unbecoming was a thing that you didn't want to be, you know. Oh, that dress is unbecoming on you.
And I think that's also part of Unbecoming, you know, like Annie John, her mother in Jamaica Kincaid novel, it's like she's climbing up the tree or she plays marbles in the street, right? And her mom is like, it's so unbecoming. Like, you're not supposed to play marbles because your dress is up and boys can see you. And she's like, you're a slut, you know, what are you doing? And I think that's also part of Unbecoming. It's like you can unbecome by performing unbecoming acts and be like, I don't really care. I'm going to play marbles on the street. I'm going to climb this tree. And like, what are you going to do about it? And I think it's definitely, we can think of Michelle Obama and becoming, right? Having to become this first lady of the United States and think about, you know, that's not actually what we're interested in. We're not trying to really mold ourselves into this version of white womanhood that has existed for, you know, centuries. We're trying to do something else over here. And even if that is unbecoming to certain people, you know.
There's something coming through the conversation that I find so interesting, which is like this unbecoming. Again, it's not about becoming, it's not about the future, it's not about a new identity, it's about exploration, creativity. You know, it is exploratory, and by definition that means doubt, that means error, mistakes along the way. And again, that is, you know, the seed of innovation. But there needs to be that kind of space for error and space for expertise in those errors and in this the opposite of error. You know, the space to be, as you often said through the year, Margaret, the space to be the expert of your own experience. And experience means explorations, no? And I found that, you know, that's coming very powerful in the conversation of exploring. So David Walker has a question, and he asks, as a Black man, how can I assist, or what should be my role in the unbecoming process?
To unbecome your ideas about masculinity, that, you know, to be masculine, you need to be in opposition to ideas of femininity, or, you know, you need to be above someone. And I think as much as unbecoming, I think in the unbecoming comes from, like, you know, Sula or any Black feminist text, like that doesn't mean that it's only applicable to Black girls and Black women. And I think we've seen that with so many things that Black women have generated throughout time, right? That it comes from our thought, but then it is useful for many people. Sometimes it gets taken up and removed from its, you know, original meaning and misconstrued and then whatever. But I think the idea that I can think through what has been placed onto me about who I'm supposed to be, and I can undo those. also applies to Black men. But I also haven't thought much about that because my focus is really, on Black girls. So.
I was asking Ruth Nicole or Jydin whether you might have follow-up commentaries to Margaret's.
I'm thinking about the conditions that are being created for that possibility that Jydin talked about, like that curiosity. I love that the aunts showed up and represented. I think that's one thing that Zoom affords, family being a part of the conversation too, because we're, if you're, at home, and I know sometimes my kids come into my Zooms and get in the conversation, if that affords a way to widen the cipher at all, unintentionally or intentionally, and how that might work. But the idea also of the summer camp being a space where, right, because certainly we still hear that, like that, we don't maybe use that word like unbecoming, but like you shouldn't wear that, or, you shouldn't say that. And I think the space of the summer camp allows for the critical questioning of that, to be like, well, why? And then to follow out all of the something else's, because that's what I'm interested in, the range and the diversity of the something else's. Like, how far can we go? Like, what are some of the more disrespectable something else's that you've encountered? Where are the limits, boundaries, if there are any? And also, being able to ask why shouldn't I wear this? Why shouldn't I talk this way? Why shouldn't I say that? Also then, makes it possible for Black girls to be, experts, as you said, of their own lives, theorists of their own imaginations, analysis of their own readings of the text. But so often I'm reminded, that we as Black girls have to pretend, as Toni K said, not to know. That they don't know, they have to pretend that they didn't hear the question why. They can't, are in situations where you can't respond, where you can't follow that line of thought that, they've already theorized and, ended with period. Why are we saying that? Because it's like, what was all before that? That's the part that the summer camp makes expressive, heard, visible, which I'm excited about.
I'm going to bring in two other questions now from the walkers. I'm not sure if this is also a familiar. So Serena asks a question for Jydin and Margaret about how this course changed or expanded what Unbecoming looks like for you personally. I think this is such an important question of like how these projects are, they develop in the ground. And that's how knowledge is produced, not as a sort of the traditional model, theoretical model, as you were saying, Ruth Nicole, in which something is, tested in the ground. This is not testing, this is making in the ground. And then Nita asks, how do we manage Unbecoming with Black survival and protection? Yeah, great questions.
I think that the internship and course expanded like what Unbecoming means to me, because it made me realize that it doesn't have to be on a like something to prove kind of level. That like I could work on myself and to like unbecome maybe the notions that I've been taught, in that it will make a greater impact, but it's not necessarily like, for example, I could wear my afro to the interview, but that's not the only thing Unbecoming is, of like proving something else to be, but like being my own or representing myself in however I want. Like, yeah, like what Sula did as she saw best. So I think the internship, especially like in the variety of ways that we saw Unbecoming, like show that to me, that it doesn't have to be something to prove, that it could be something that you can reflect upon on yourself in your own lives. Yeah.
Thank you, Jydin, for that. I'm gonna let you answer, and I'm gonna let that answer that question. And then thinking about how do we manage unbecoming with Black survival and protection? I think this is actually something that I think has changed for me. Also, I guess to answer both question, and thinking about like unbecoming doesn't need to be this widespread thing that, you know, your whole life is unbecoming, right? Or your whole life is like anti-respectability or radical. But unbecoming can happen in very small moments too. And so sometimes that might mean that, you know, you do go the becoming route, right? Just for it to be safe or to have some protection in that moment. And then you're negotiating, right? I think that's what is happening in a lot of these narratives, is that Black girls and women are always, it's a constant negotiation of, you know, I might unbecome in this moment, and in this one, I might just let it go. I used to have a student in DC who transgressive Black girl to the fullest. Like, I'm talking like throwing chairs or whatever. I used to say to her, like, why are you throwing a chair in this moment? You know, we're not in this one. Like, what are you trying to communicate? And like, let's think about when you're trying to be transgressive, make sure it's intentional, right? Like, make sure you have, like, there's something going on behind that, whatever it is. And, you know, we still got thrown chairs, but usually like it was something, I was like, yes, Lillian, like, I agree. I see why you're angry. I see why you're mad. And I see why you're communicating this in this way. And I think it's about that negotiation, which isn't always, you know, easy to find or figure out for yourself. But
I think that questions just keep piling, at least for me. And there's one more question in the chat. I'm going to bring it up, and then we're going to have to start closing up, because I know everyone, you know, we're up as much as we can take on Zoom. So Jay asks, again, going even broader, not from the very small space of the exercise to the broader. There's some people that would view the idea of unbecoming as something super radical, because it doesn't fit within the current structure laid out for Black women. How do you view your process of unbecoming with the larger context of the world? Is it going against the grain, pure self-discovery, or something in between? I think this is such a great question, and I would like to bring it up, something that I was thinking with your answer right now, Jydin. You know, you're navigating this debate about, this debate about, you know, self-discovery, the individual self-discovery, yet this is not about individual self-discovery. You're always talking about in collectivity. So I think that there's this tension between the individual self-making or not even making, but, you know, invention and testing of unbecoming that is very individualistic. But really your project, Margaret, and your experience, Jydin, is about a collective. And I guess the question is, what is the scale of that collective? How far can we go with this project? You know, in these questions of like, Jay is asking, how do you view your process of unbecoming within the larger context of the world? I don't know what the world is for you, Jay, but I'll leave that scale for you, Margaret, to address.
yeah, I was thinking, I'm like, well, what is the world? But I think, yes, unbecoming, like, you can take it very far to think about, you know, I'm unbecoming the idea that I'm subhuman, or, you know, and with that, I'm creating a whole worldview or, you know, system of knowledge for myself to fit into, you know, not like creating something else to be, right? Like thinking about that something else to be, like, that's a really capacious, like, phrase there, right? And there's not much definition with that. And so I think you could take that as big as like, you know, I'm calling for abolition in some ways, right? Like, I am creating a whole new world for myself and my people to fit into. So I don't even really maybe have to unbecome, right? Like, I have the freedom and triumph from jump. And, you know, maybe that's a radical way of thinking of something else to be. And I think, yeah, you could take it down to the smaller scale, which I struggle with that word radical sometimes, because I'm like, I don't know in context of what, you know, to what extreme or to what route we're at. But I think it can be on a smaller scale, maybe with, you know, traditional idea of radical, and that, you know, I'm doing interior negotiations with myself and my ideas of what I've been taught it means to be human or a Black girl, and how I'm creating room for myself within those categories that have been placed onto me. And so I think there's wiggle room, and I don't have like a set definition for myself. I think it changes, which I also think is what's nice about Unbecoming. You know, there's always room for it to expand and continue to, you know, map on. It's like I negotiate my own self, you know, and identity as a Black woman. So I don't really have like a set answer to that question.
I agree with Ms. Margaret that I think it can be a range of things, that maybe Unbecoming may not be extremely radical. It could be like something like minute, but I think that I feel like self-discovery, like individual, it will help the majority. But I also feel like that we need a lot of individual for a majority to happen. So I think that it's very widespread of what we can do, but what little that we do makes a big difference. So yeah, it's like a grand scale.
I see something else is absolutely, you know, big in vision, overturning everything. And I'm thinking about, again, Sula and Nel, to bring it back, you know, this friendship. What does it mean? You said create media. Yeah. Photography, art, poetry, literary analysis, which we heard, but also the creation of friendship through Unbecoming, the political possibilities there, I think are radical. I will use that word because there is, you know, what we haven't mentioned maybe, or could talk about more if we have more time, are the risks involved in Unbecoming, gender, whatever, you know, dominant scripts, and to become a hand in hand, a heart in heart, Black girl to Black girl under those conditions, you know, so much is possible. I even hear, Jydin, I really appreciate you know, you called the interiority against the grain, like Jydin said, she is the grain, she is the marigold, the sunflower, the garden. Like it is a grain, it's earthly, it's a growing, it's an in bloom kind of thing. And I think about what all has to change to be able to hear Jydin say that and claim that as a Black girl for her own self, because she can, because she made it so. That's gonna also take some radical overturning on our part, some unbecoming among adults, or whatever, you know.
That what you said made me think about that question in Sula at the end when Sula's dying and she says, you know, well, how do you know it was you? To Nel, you know, how do you know it was you that was good? And I think in that question, we're getting that like upturning of what we know to be good, to be bad, our whole epistemology, right? And Sula's like, her life takes us there. So I think on that sense, like, yes, totally radical. I mean, Sula she's all the way there. And then the consequences, right? Jydin talks about it all the time, you know, where she died, yes, she died in the love of her own dirt, but she also died lonely, right? And she gives Nel that drag of like, you lonely too, like you a secondhand lonely, like who, that's the worst thing ever. Which I'm like, I wish I could drag somebody like that at any point in my lifetime. But I think we see that they make those gestures. And I think maybe it's, you know, up to us then to, okay, how do we follow them?
Margaret, this was beautiful. I'm sorry that we have to end. I know that we could keep going for a long time, and I really, truly hope that this is the beginning of a much longer conversation. But in this spirit of how do we follow them? How do we follow you and your project, and how this grows? Jydin, you as well, and all of your students. Ruth Nicole talked about, you know, owning that space and that power that you hold to pull in Black girls into thinking in new ways, but also you're pulling in Black men, white women, thinkers at large to think differently. And certainly this has been my experience in this last hour and a half. I've learned a lot. I'm thinking differently about your project, about identity, about teenagers, about Black girlhood, and about so much more. So I thank you so much for your time, everyone, for your thoughts. Jydin, for your hard work, your energy. It's been truly energizing and inspiring. Ruth Nicole Brown for being here, and I hope you continue to be friends of the program. Everyone, for your time. I invite you now to join us next week at the same time to talk about spirit sharing, different religions, and how they produce community and conversations with Julian Sanchez, another one of our fellows. But really, my truly heartfelt thanks to Margaret, your generosity, your time. As Ruth Nicole said, don't be shy about your intellect, your example, and your love. It really makes a difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.